She ruled over an empire that covered a quarter of the world, but her dinner table might be the biggest surprise of all. Queen Victoria's diet was a fascinating mix of discipline, indulgence, and downright strange habits that tell us more about her than any royal biography ever could. Today we're uncovering the hidden world of royal meals, the breakfast routines, the midnight snacks, and the dining rules that shocked even her guests. Ready to find out what Britain's most famous monarch really ate? Breakfast. The scrambled egg obsession. Queen Victoria's breakfast table would have impressed any modern brunch enthusiast. Kitchen records from the 1870s show that breakfast typically included at least 8 different hot dishes laid out on silver warmers. Victoria had a particular fondness for scrambled eggs, but these were no ordinary scrambled eggs. Royal chefs prepared them with cream and butter until they reached a consistency described in records as cloud-like. The Queen insisted they be served immediately after cooking, which meant kitchen staff had to time everything precisely to avoid her displeasure. Beyond the eggs, breakfast offerings included kidneys, bacon, sausages, kedgeree, a Victorian rice and fish dish with Indian origins, cold meats, and various breads. Kitchen accounts from 1887 note that breakfast preparations began at 5 a.m. to ensure everything was ready when Victoria descended at 9 a.m. sharp. The interesting part is the speed at which she ate. Court memoirs from her ladies-in-waiting describe breakfast as a rushed affair, but we'll come back to this later. Luncheon. Light but lavish. Luncheon at Victoria's court occupied a curious middle ground between informal and elaborate. Meals were typically served at 2 p.m. and consisted of around 6 courses, though they were smaller portions than dinner. The Queen preferred cold meats, game pies, and salads for luncheon. Kitchen inventories from Windsor Castle show regular orders for cooked chickens, tongue, and various terrines. These were arranged on sideboards, and guests could serve themselves, one of the few informal aspects of royal dining. Victoria particularly enjoyed potted meats, which were essentially Victorian pâtés sealed with butter. Recipe books preserved at the Royal Archives include detailed instructions for potted tongue, potted shrimp, and potted game, each with specific spice combinations the Queen favoured. Fresh fruit appeared at every luncheon, regardless of season. This required considerable expense and effort in Victorian times. Royal accounts show regular payments to specialty greengrocers who supplied grapes, peaches, and melons year-round, often grown in heated glass houses. A single out-of-season pineapple could cost the equivalent of several weeks' wages for a servant, but Victoria expected exotic fruits to be available daily. One peculiar luncheon habit involved timing again. Like breakfast, luncheon moved at Victoria's pace. Court. Diaries mention that she would often eat while standing or walking through rooms, making luncheon an even faster affair than breakfast. This left visiting dignitaries scrambling to eat while maintaining royal protocol. The speed problem. Here's where royal dining became genuinely difficult for guests. Victoria ate quickly, and when she finished a course, that course was over for everyone. Court memoirs are filled with complaints about leaving dinner hungry. The Queen would typically finish each course in just a few minutes, and footmen immediately removed all plates, whether guests had finished or not. One visiting ambassador's diary entry describes watching his untouched fish course disappear while he was mid-conversation with his neighbor. This created a strategic challenge. Experienced courtiers learned to eat quickly without appearing to rush, taking bites whenever the Queen did. New visitors often left their first royal dinner having barely eaten anything. Princess Marie-Louise wrote in her memoirs about leaving her first dinner at Windsor Castle, absolutely starving, after managing only a few bites across 12 courses. The problem intensified as Victoria aged. In her later years, she ate even faster than in her youth. Kitchen records indicate that entire 12-course dinners sometimes concluded in under 40 minutes. For comparison, Formal dinners at other European courts typically lasted 2 to 3 hours. Palace staff dealt with this by preparing food in easily consumed portions and ensuring that everything could be eaten quickly if necessary. Tough meats were avoided, vegetables were cut small, and soups were served at temperatures that allowed immediate consumption. The kitchen essentially designed menus around the Queen's eating speed. Dinner, the main event. Dinner at Victoria's court was an orchestrated production that could last several hours. Served at 8:30 p.m., it consisted of anywhere from 8 to 12 courses, depending on whether there were guests. The sheer scale of food preparation was remarkable. Kitchen records from a typical dinner in 1895 show that chefs prepared multiple options for each course, ensuring variety even though only a fraction would be eaten. A single dinner might include 3 soup choices, 4 fish preparations, 6 meat dishes, and multiple desserts. Victoria's personal preferences shaped these menus considerably. She loved roast beef and insisted it appear regularly, prepared precisely to her liking. Well done, contrary to the rare beef preferred by many at court. Kitchen staff maintained detailed notes about her preferences, recording that she favored brown gravy over wine-based sauces and preferred vegetables cooked until very soft. Game featured heavily when in season. Pheasant, partridge, venison, and grouse all appeared on royal menus. Kitchen accounts show the royal estate at Balmoral supplied hundreds of birds annually. These were often prepared simply, roasted with basic seasonings, reflecting Victoria's preference for straightforward cooking rather than elaborate French preparations. One surprising element was the presence of Indian-influenced dishes. After Victoria became Empress of India in 1876, curries and other Indian preparations appeared regularly at dinner. Menus from the 1880s list mulligatawny soup, various curries, and dal as standard offerings. The Queen employed Indian servants who advised the kitchen on authentic preparations. The dining room itself operated under strict rules. Conversations were directed by Victoria. You spoke when she addressed you, and about topics she chose. Multiple courtiers' diaries describe the anxiety of royal dinners, where making interesting conversation on demand was required while eating complex foods with perfect etiquette. Afternoon tea, a sacred ritual. Afternoon tea was perhaps the most predictable meal in Victoria's day. Served precisely at 5 p.m., it followed a rigid format that staff could execute with their eyes closed. The Queen took her tea with milk and a small amount of sugar. Her tea was Earl Grey, served at a precise temperature. Kitchen staff used a thermometer to ensure it was exactly right. Too hot, and she would wait. Too cold, and it would be sent back. The food accompanying tea was surprisingly restrained compared to other meals. Thin sandwiches, cucumber was a favorite, along with scones, small cakes, and occasionally muffins. Kitchen accounts show weekly orders for specific teas and consistent quantities of flour, butter, and preserves for baking. What made afternoon tea significant was its social function. This was when Victoria conducted informal audiences, received family, and discussed palace business. Court correspondence shows that being invited to afternoon tea indicated favor, while being excluded suggested displeasure. Victoria had strong opinions about tea etiquette. She insisted on proper pouring technique. Tea first, then milk. Multiple accounts from court observers note that she would visibly react if someone poured milk first, considering it improper. One German princess visiting the court wrote home describing how terrified she was of making a mistake during tea service. The German influence. Victoria's German heritage significantly influenced her eating habits. Born to a German mother and married to German Prince Albert, she maintained German food traditions throughout her life. Sauerkraut appeared regularly on royal menus, unusual for British tables of the era. Kitchen records list regular orders for barrels of prepared sauerkraut from specific German suppliers. Court observers noted that this remained a fixture even after Albert's death in 1861, when Victoria abandoned many other practices. German sausages and cured meats were breakfast staples. Kitchen accounts show orders for specific German varieties that were either imported or made by staff following German recipes. Victoria's breakfast table included Leberwurst, Bratwurst, and other preparations that British courtiers found exotic. Christmas traditions at court were heavily German, including the foods served. Victoria popularized the Christmas tree in Britain, and German Christmas foods came along with it. Menus from Christmas week show Stollen, Lebkuchen, and marzipan treats alongside traditional British Christmas fare. The Queen's insistence on maintaining these German foods, despite considerable anti-German sentiment in Britain during various political tensions, shows how strongly she valued these connections. Even during periods when German culture was unpopular, menus continued featuring German dishes. Desserts and sweets, the Queen's weakness. If Victoria had a culinary weakness, it was sweets. Kitchen accounts show remarkable quantities of sugar, chocolate, and candied fruits ordered weekly. Her favorite dessert was chocolate sponge cake, which she requested so frequently that chefs developed a standardized recipe. The Royal Archives preserve this recipe, noting that it should be moist, dark, and rich with chocolate. Kitchen accounts show regular orders for the finest chocolate available, imported from specific suppliers in London. Ice cream appeared at nearly every dinner, regardless of season. Victorian ice cream required considerable labor to produce, involving ice harvested in winter and stored in ice houses, then used with salt to create the freezing temperatures needed. Windsor's ice houses could store up to 40 tons of ice, dedicated largely to ice cream production. Victoria particularly enjoyed fruit-based desserts. Strawberries, raspberries, and peaches appeared fresh in season and preserved the rest of the year. Kitchen inventories list dozens of jars of preserved fruits, stored in dedicated pantries. One steward's account book from 1883 records purchasing over 200 pounds of strawberries in a single week during June. Perhaps most surprising was her love of something quite simple: plain sponge cake with jam. Despite access to the most elaborate desserts Victorian pastry chefs could create, she regularly requested this childhood favorite. Kitchen accounts show that raspberry jam was purchased in large quantities, specifically for this purpose. Drinks, wine, whiskey, and water. Victoria's drinking habits were more moderate than many assume. Wine consumption records show relatively modest quantities compared to other royal households of the era. She preferred wine diluted with water, typically mixing claret with water at a ratio of about half and half. This was common practice in Victorian times, though Victoria maintained the habit more strictly than most. Royal cellars contained extensive wine collections, but consumption records show she personally drank sparingly. Whiskey appeared later in her life, particularly at Balmoral. She developed a fondness for Scotch whiskey mixed with water, considering it medicinal. Correspondence with her doctor includes letters discussing whether whiskey was beneficial for her health. He apparently encouraged it, and she continued the practice into old age. Champagne was reserved for special occasions. Accounts show champagne purchases increasing during celebrations, state visits, and holidays, but it appeared rarely at ordinary dinners. Victoria preferred still wines for regular consumption. Interestingly, the Queen drank relatively little tea outside of afternoon tea, despite tea being ubiquitous in Victorian Britain. Breakfast usually included coffee, prepared strong and served hot. Kitchen records note specific coffee suppliers in London, with beans ground fresh daily in the kitchens. The Scottish Retreat. Balmoral Castle in Scotland offered Victoria a different culinary experience than Windsor or Buckingham Palace. She spent several months annually at Balmoral and developed distinct Scottish food preferences. Porridge appeared at breakfast throughout her stays in Scotland. Records indicate this was prepared in the traditional Scottish manner, with water and salt, no sugar or cream. This represented a departure from the elaborate English breakfasts served at her other residences. Scottish game and fish dominated Balmoral menus. Salmon from the River Dee, grouse from the estate's moors, and venison from the forests all featured prominently. Kitchen accounts show that these were prepared more simply than similar foods at Windsor, often just roasted or grilled rather than made into complex dishes. Victoria particularly enjoyed Scottish shortbread and oatcakes. Kitchen records include recipes for both, with notes indicating the Queen's preferences for specific textures and levels of sweetness. She would send these back to England as gifts, considering them superior to English biscuits. The informality of Balmoral extended to dining arrangements. Meals were somewhat less formal than at Windsor, though still far more elaborate than typical homes. Court diaries describe outdoor lunches during fine weather, with food prepared in the castle kitchens and transported to picnic locations on the estate. State banquets. Dining as theatre. State banquets represented the pinnacle of royal dining, where meals became political theatre designed to impress foreign dignitaries and demonstrate British power. These events served vastly more food than anyone could eat. Records from an 1897 state banquet list over 400 individual dishes prepared for approximately 150 guests. This abundance was intentional, displaying wealth and capability through excess. The menu planning alone required weeks of work. Correspondence shows that menus were submitted to the Queen for approval, often revised multiple times. She paid attention to dietary restrictions of foreign guests, ensuring appropriate options were available. When hosting Russian dignitaries during Lent, additional fish courses were prepared to accommodate Orthodox fasting practices. Each course followed precise choreography. Footmen served guests simultaneously, requiring extensive rehearsal. Staff documents include detailed timing charts showing exactly when each course should be served, how long guests should have to eat, and when to clear plates. The food itself emphasized British excellence. Roast beef featured prominently, symbolizing British tradition. Game from royal estates demonstrated the bounty of the realm. Exotic fruits showed access to the empire's resources. Kitchen accounts from these events show purchases of the finest ingredients available, regardless of cost. Foreign visitors' accounts of these banquets express amazement at the scale and precision. One French diplomat's memoir describes a state banquet as a military operation executed with food instead of soldiers. The goal was clearly achieved. These meals left lasting impressions of British power and sophistication. Personal quirks and preferences. Victoria's personal eating habits included several quirks that staff learned to accommodate. She strongly disliked waste. Despite the abundance served at royal meals, leftover food was distributed systematically. Servants received leftover meats and bread, local charities received certain items, and some foods were repurposed in staff meals. One steward's diary describes the Queen inspecting kitchens and expressing displeasure at wasted food. Temperature was crucial. Foods had to arrive at precisely the right temperature. Kitchens installed specialized equipment to keep foods hot during the long journey from kitchen to dining room. Cold foods similarly required careful timing to prevent wilting or warming. She had strong opinions about presentation. Multiple chefs' memoirs mention her insistence that foods look appetizing. Garnishes should be fresh, colors should contrast pleasingly, and nothing should appear sloppy. Dishes were returned to the kitchen if presentation failed to meet standards. Repetition bothered her less than variety. Despite having access to enormous menu options, she frequently requested the same dishes. Menus from different years show remarkable consistency in core offerings. This actually simplified kitchen operations, as staff became expert at preparing her favorite dishes. One peculiar habit involved salt. Victoria preferred food well seasoned and would add extra salt at the table. This was unusual for the era, when heavily salted food was associated with lower-class eating. Kitchen records include notes reminding chefs to season her portions more heavily than others. The widowhood years. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, Victoria's eating habits changed noticeably. Records show a shift toward simpler, more modest meals. Dinner courses reduced from 12 to 8 or 9. Kitchen accounts show decreased spending on exotic ingredients and imported delicacies. This reflected both her mourning and a genuine shift in preferences. Court diaries from this period describe dinner as more somber affairs, shorter in duration and less elaborate in preparation. Comfort foods appeared more frequently. The dishes she had enjoyed with Albert, German preparations, simple roasts, familiar desserts, became staples. Menus show increased repetition, with the same dishes appearing weekly rather than rotating through wider variety. She ate alone more often. Rather than hosting large dinners nightly, Victoria frequently dined in her private rooms, with just a lady-in-waiting for company. Kitchen records show separate, smaller meal preparations for these private dinners, distinct from the formal dining room meals served to courtiers. However, state obligations continued. When hosting official functions, the full elaborate meal service remained. The striking contrast between simple private dinners and lavish public banquets shows how Victoria separated personal preference from royal duty. Interestingly, her appetite remained robust. Despite the reduced formality, portion size and the speed of eating remained consistent. Staff continued dealing with her rapid eating pace, and guests still left dinners hungry if they were invited to private meals. The kitchen operation. Behind Victoria's meals was a massive kitchen operation that ran with military precision. Palace employment records show that Windsor Castle's kitchens employed over 45 people during Victoria's reign. The kitchen hierarchy was strict. The head chef, always male and often French, oversaw multiple sous chefs, each responsible for specific aspects of meal preparation. Below them were specialized cooks for roasting, sauce-making, pastry, and vegetable preparation. Kitchen accounts include detailed job descriptions and wage records for each position. Food procurement required its own staff. Palace records show regular purchases from dozens of suppliers across London and beyond. Meat came from specific butchers who held royal warrants. Fish arrived daily from suppliers in coastal towns. Vegetables came from royal gardens when possible, supplemented by commercial suppliers. Storage facilities were extensive. Windsor Castle contained multiple pantries, each climate-controlled for specific foods. Ice houses stored ice for preservation and dessert making. Wine cellars held thousands of bottles. Dry goods pantries stored flour, sugar, and other staples in quantities that would supply a small village. The daily schedule began at 4 a.m., when kitchen staff started fires in the massive cooking ranges. Bread baking came first, followed by breakfast preparation. Throughout the day, different teams prepared different meals, with carefully coordinated timing to ensure everything arrived at the correct temperature. Waste management was organized systematically. Food scraps went to pig farms that supplied pork to the palace, creating a circular economy. Bones went to soup stock or were sold to glue manufacturers. Even vegetable peelings were composted for the palace gardens. Account books show that virtually nothing was simply thrown away. So what did Queen Victoria really eat? Her diet balanced luxury with surprising restraint. She had access to every delicacy the empire could offer, yet her tastes leaned toward comfort and simplicity. Good ingredients, familiar flavors, and straightforward cooking. Her famously quick meals set the pace for everyone around her, shaping how royal dining was planned and served. Even in the palace, her personal habits became protocol. German traditions, Scottish influences, and ingredients from across the empire all found their way to her table, reflecting Victorian Britain itself, diverse, ambitious, and deeply traditional at the same time. What surprised you most about her dining habits? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this royal deep dive, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of how people really lived in history. Thanks for watching. Think modern dinner party etiquette is stressful? Try navigating a Victorian dinner party. In the elegant dining rooms of 19th century Britain, dinner was a carefully choreographed performance where one wrong move could ruin your social standing. Rules governed everything from how you entered the room to which topics you could discuss. Miss a signal, use the wrong fork, or speak out of turn, and you might never receive another invitation. This was dining as social warfare, where the upper and middle classes used elaborate rules to separate themselves from those below. The food was just part of it. The real test was knowing how to behave. Let's step into the dining room and see what rules you'd need to survive a Victorian dinner party. The strict seating hierarchy. You couldn't just sit wherever you wanted at a Victorian dinner party. Seating was determined by strict social rank, and getting it wrong was a serious breach of etiquette. The host and hostess sat at opposite ends of the table. The most important guests sat to their right. From there, everyone was arranged in descending order of importance, alternating male and female. De Brits and Burke's peerage were consulted to determine who outranked whom. A baronet outranked a knight, who outranked a gentleman with no title. Your placement told everyone exactly where you stood socially. Being seated far from the host meant you were considered less important. Married couples were separated unless newlywed, forcing guests to make conversation with people they might not know well. No discussing business, politics, or religion. Victorian dinner conversation followed strict rules about appropriate topics. Business talk was vulgar, politics was too controversial, religion was too personal. Acceptable topics included the weather, social events, theatre, books, and light gossip. Victorian manuals published lists of suitable subjects, essentially safe, bland topics unlikely to spark debate. Women faced even stricter limitations. They should be charming but never too intellectual. Victorian guides warned against excessive displays of learning that might make male guests uncomfortable. Start eating immediately. Here's one that surprises people. Victorians expected you to begin eating as soon as you were served. Waiting for others was considered old-fashioned and ill-bred. Victorian etiquette books stated, "As soon as you are helped, begin to eat," or if the viands are too hot for your palate, take up your knife and fork and appear to begin. To wait for others is now not only old-fashioned but ill-bred. This is the opposite of modern etiquette. The Victorian logic was that waiting meant the first people served would have cold food. However, you still needed to avoid eating so slowly that you held up the table. The balance required constant attention. Polite acknowledgement of servants. The etiquette around acknowledging servants was subtle and specific. Victorian etiquette books instructed guests to thank servants politely, but quietly. One 1889 guide stated, "By all means thank a servant for replacing a dropped napkin, a knife or fork. However, it should be done in a low tone without making a show of it. A simple thank you spoken quietly or a gracious nod was appropriate. What was improper was having conversations with servants or giving them audible directions during dinner. The key was acknowledging service without disrupting conversation." This practice continued well into the 20th century. The finger bowl protocol. Finger bowls appeared after certain courses, containing warm water sometimes scented with lemon or rose petals. The proper technique? Dip only your fingertips, one hand at a time. pat them dry on your napkin. Never wash your entire hand, never use both hands simultaneously, and certainly never drink from it. Victorian manuals devoted considerable space to finger bowl protocol, suggesting it was a common source of confusion. The finger bowl became a class marker. Knowing how to use it properly proved you dined in elegant homes before. Ladies withdrew after dinner. At the end of the meal, the hostess would catch the eye of the senior female guest and rise. This was the signal for all women to leave the dining room, retiring to the drawing room for tea. The men remained at the table for port, cigars, and conversation for 30 to 45 minutes. This allowed them to discuss business and politics, the topics forbidden during dinner. The withdrawal was also a test of social knowledge. Rising too early or too late marked you as unfamiliar with proper form. Complex glove rules. Women wore gloves to Victorian dinner parties, but removing them involved confusing protocol. By the late Victorian period, women kept gloves on until seated, then removed them discreetly and placed them in their lap under the napkin. One 1843 etiquette book stated, "At the time of taking refreshment, of course, they must be taken off. No well-educated person would eat in gloves." However, customs varied by household. Men's rules were simpler. Gloves were removed in the entrance hall and never brought into the dining room. Directional service rules. Victorian table service followed specific directional patterns. Dishes were presented from your left and removed from your right. Wine was poured from your right. You passed dishes to the right. These rules created choreographed flow around the table. But you were expected to know them instinctively and never appear to think about them. When a servant presented a dish, you needed to serve yourself an appropriate portion. Not too much, which appeared greedy, not too little, which suggested inadequate food. This unconscious grace could only come from extensive practice. Napkin signals. Your napkin was a communication device with its own rules. You unfolded it partially when the hostess did the same. You never tucked it into your collar like a bib. During the meal you touched the napkin to your lips occasionally, but never wiped aggressively. At meal's end you placed it loosely on the table, never refolding it neatly, as that suggested the napkin was clean enough to be used again. The napkin also signaled intentions. Placing it on your chair meant you'd return. On the table meant you were finished. Arrive 15 minutes late. Victorian dinner guests were expected to arrive exactly 15 minutes after the stated time. This gave the host final preparation time and ensured everyone arrived within a small window. Arriving exactly on time was considered rude. It suggested you were too eager or didn't understand proper form. Arriving more than 15 minutes late was equally offensive, as it disrupted the carefully timed meal service. This punctuality rule applied specifically to dinner parties. Other social occasions had different timing expectations, and knowing which rule applied to which event was part of demonstrating social competence. The procession into dinner. Moving from the drawing room to the dining room was a ceremonious procession, not a casual walk. Before dinner was announced, the hostess would discreetly inform each gentleman which lady he would escort. When the servant announced dinner, couples processed into the dining room in order of social precedence, the most honored guests first, the host and hostess last. Getting this order wrong could create serious offense. The hostess had to carefully organize the procession, which became complicated with single people or widows. This formal entrance set the tone for the entire evening. Moderate commentary on food. While Victorians weren't forbidden from commenting on food entirely, excessive praise or criticism was poor form. The expectation was that food would naturally be excellent, so overly enthusiastic compliments suggested surprise. Victorian guides advised against overly commenting on the food, including both particular praise or criticism. You could indicate enjoyment through actions, eating with pleasure, accepting seconds. The rule had a practical basis. The hostess hadn't prepared the food herself. Her cook had. Extended discussion might give servants ideas above their station. Conversation timing. Victorian dinner conversation required careful timing. You needed to be interesting, but not dominating. Respond when addressed, but don't speak too much unasked. Long stories were risky. Etiquette guides specifically advised against beginning anecdotes that couldn't be completed before plates were cleared. This created a particular style of dinner talk, quick, witty, and superficial. The most valued guests could tell an amusing story in a few sentences or deliver a perfectly timed quip. The skill was being engaging without being overbearing. Never blow on hot food. If your food was too hot, you simply had to wait until it cooled. Blowing on your food was considered distasteful and showed a lack of patience and refinement. Victorian etiquette emphasized appearing composed and unhurried. Blowing on food suggested you were too eager to eat, which was seen as somewhat piggish. The expectation was that well-bred people could wait calmly for food to reach an appropriate temperature. This rule applied to all foods and drinks. If your soup or tea was too hot, you set it aside briefly and continued conversation until it cooled naturally. The departure timing. Knowing when to leave was as important as knowing how to behave. Victorian etiquette books specified that guests were expected to linger for 2 or 3 hours after the dinner, and no one may politely depart until at least 1 hour has passed. The senior female guest would make subtle preparations to leave, and others would follow her lead. The hostess gave subtle signals when ready for guests to depart, calling for coats, shifting towards the door. Reading these signals required experience. Overstaying your welcome could mean not receiving another invitation. Within 1 week, you were required to pay a brief dinner call to thank your hosts. So what were Victorian dinner parties really like? They were elaborate performances where social standing was tested through countless small rules. The next time you stress about modern dinner etiquette, remember, at least you don't have to calculate your conversation timing by course, or worry about whether your glove removal was properly subtle. Which of these rules surprises you most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look at Victorian social customs, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about how people really lived and stressed in the past. Thanks for watching. How many cooks does it take to feed one woman? For Queen Victoria, over 100. The royal kitchens employed armies of specialized staff, each with specific duties in an elaborate hierarchy. Every meal required coordination between multiple kitchen departments working simultaneously. A single state dinner might involve 50 people in food preparation alone, not counting the servers, footmen, and support staff who moved food from kitchen to table. The hierarchy was rigid, the standards were exacting, and the pressure was constant. Let's explore how Victorian royal kitchens actually functioned. The master of the household. At the top of the entire operation sat the master of the household, overseeing all domestic arrangements, including the kitchens. This was typically a nobleman who managed the royal household's operations and budget. The master of the household didn't cook or directly supervise cooking. His role was administrative, approving menus, managing budgets, hiring senior staff, and ensuring the household ran smoothly. He answered directly to the Queen on all household matters. Below him sat various department heads, each responsible for specific areas. The kitchen hierarchy was just one part of a massive domestic operation that included hundreds of servants across multiple departments. The position came with substantial salary and prestige. The master of the household was a powerful figure in court, controlling access to resources and making decisions that affected everyone below him. Annual budgets for food and kitchen operations passed through his office. He approved major purchases, authorized expenditures, and received regular reports on kitchen operations and costs. Sous chefs and department heads. Below the royal chef were multiple sous chefs, each heading a specific kitchen department. These men supervised day-to-day operations in their areas. The roasting chef managed all roasted meats, beef, poultry, game, and pork. This was a crucial position given the importance of roast meats in Victorian dining. He supervised a team of cooks who prepared, seasoned, and roasted meats to precise specifications. The sauce chef controlled all sauce preparations. Victorian haute cuisine relied heavily on elaborate sauces. This department produced dozens of different sauces, each requiring specific techniques and timing. The sauce chef was typically highly trained and experienced. The pastry chef headed the pastry department, separate from the main kitchen. This department produced breads, cakes, pastries, and elaborate dessert preparations. The pastry chef often had a background in French patisserie and commanded significant respect. The fish chef managed all fish and seafood preparations. Fresh fish arrived daily and required immediate processing and cooking. The fish chef ensured proper handling and preparation of expensive seafood. The soup chef supervised soup production. Victorian meals typically included multiple soup options. The soup chef maintained stocks, prepared consommes and elaborate soups, and ensured consistent quality. Each department head earned good wages, $50 to $100 annually, and had authority to hire, fire, and manage their staff. They reported to the royal chef but ran their departments independently. The royal chef. The head chef, often called the royal chef or chef de cuisine, commanded the entire kitchen operation. This position went exclusively to men, typically French, as French cuisine dominated fine dining. The royal chef planned menus, created new dishes, supervised all cooking, trained staff, and maintained kitchen standards. He answered to the master of the household, but ran the kitchens with near absolute authority. The salary was substantial, hundreds of pounds annually, far more than most professionals earned. The prestige was enormous. Being royal chef was the pinnacle of culinary careers. Former royal chefs could command premium positions anywhere in the world. The chef maintained personal relationships with suppliers, ensuring the finest ingredients arrived at the royal kitchens. He inspected deliveries personally, rejecting anything that failed to meet standards. He rarely cooked himself during normal operations. His role was supervisory and creative. He developed new dishes, refined existing recipes, and ensured consistency across all preparations. During major events, he might prepare specific dishes personally as a mark of their importance. The position required diplomatic skills as much as culinary ability. The chef navigated between the master of the household's budget concerns, the Queen's personal preferences, and his staff's capabilities. Managing this balance determined success or failure. Specialized cooks. Below the department heads were specialized cooks focusing on specific tasks within each department. Roasting cooks tended the roasting spits and ovens. They monitored temperatures, basted meats, and timed everything precisely. The work was hot, physically demanding, and required constant attention. Sauce cooks prepared the elaborate sauces under the sauce chef's supervision. They reduced stocks, prepared roux, mixed ingredients, and timed everything to coordinate with other dishes. The precision required was extreme. Pastry cooks in the pastry department mixed doughs, shaped breads, assembled cakes, and created elaborate desserts. They worked early morning hours to ensure fresh breads for breakfast and prepared elaborate desserts for dinner. Fish cooks prepared various fish dishes, from simple preparations to elaborate presentations. They received training in fish cleaning, filleting, and multiple cooking techniques specific to seafood. Vegetable cooks prepared the numerous side dishes required for each meal. They cleaned, peeled, chopped, and cooked vegetables according to specific instructions. The volume of vegetable preparation was enormous. These specialized cooks earned $30 to $50 annually, depending on skill and experience. They were skilled workers who had completed apprenticeships and demonstrated competence. If you're still here after learning about Royal Kitchen organization, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes historical details. Kitchen maids. Kitchen maids formed the foundation of the entire operation. These young women handled the basic tasks that kept kitchens functioning. Scullery maids occupied the lowest position. They scrubbed pots, cleaned floors, washed vegetables, and performed the dirtiest kitchen work. They started as young as 12 or 13, earning perhaps $8 to $12 annually, plus room and board. The work was brutal. Scullery maids stood for 12 to 16 hours daily, hands constantly in water, scrubbing pots with harsh soap and sand. The water was often cold, the work area unheated, and the supervision strict. Kitchen maids above scullery maids assisted cooks with food preparation. They chopped vegetables, plucked poultry, cleaned fish, and performed repetitive tasks under supervision. They earned slightly more, $12 to $20 annually, and had marginally better working conditions. Advancement was possible. A hard-working scullery maid might become a kitchen maid after several years. A capable kitchen maid might eventually train as a specialized cook. The path was long and uncertain, but it existed. The turnover was high. Young women left for marriage, were dismissed for mistakes, or simply couldn't handle the physical demands. The royal household constantly recruited new kitchen maids to replace those who departed. The still room. The still room was another specialized department, traditionally headed by women. This department prepared preserves, candies, distilled waters, and various specialty items. The still room maid held a senior position, supervising other maids in producing jams, jellies, candied fruits, and preserved items. She also managed tea preparation, ensuring proper water temperature and steeping times. The still room produced items requiring delicate handling and precise timing. Preserving seasonal fruits, making marmalades, candying peels, and preparing medicinal teas all fell under still room jurisdiction. This department operated somewhat independently, having its own space and equipment. The still room was typically quieter and cooler than the main kitchens, suitable for the delicate work performed there. The still room maid earned $30 to $50 annually, good wages for a female servant position. Her literacy was required for following recipes and maintaining records of production. The daily schedule. Royal kitchens operated around the clock, with different staff working different shifts to maintain continuous operations. Morning began at 3 a.m. when pastry staff arrived to begin bread production. By 5 a.m., kitchen fires were lit and breakfast preparations began. Breakfast service started around 9 a.m., but preparations needed to be complete well before. Mid-morning, after breakfast service, focused on preparation for luncheon. Stocks were made, vegetables were prepared, and initial work on luncheon dishes began. Luncheon service started at 2 p.m. Afternoon preparations for dinner dominated the schedule. Dinner was the main meal and required the most elaborate preparations. Multiple courses needed coordination across departments. Dinner service began at 8:30 p.m. Late evening, after dinner service, clean-up dominated. Pots were scrubbed, surfaces were cleaned, equipment was put away. The clean-up from a major dinner could take several hours. Throughout the day, staff took brief breaks for their own meals, eaten in servants' dining areas. The meals were simpler than those prepared for the royal family, but substantial enough to fuel the hard labor. Night staff maintained fires, ensured security, and handled any late requests. The kitchens were never truly empty or inactive. Support staff. Beyond the cooking staff, numerous support positions kept the kitchens operational. The clerk of the kitchen managed supplies, maintained inventories, and tracked expenditures. He ordered ingredients, paid suppliers, and kept detailed account books. This administrative position required literacy and numeracy, rare skills that commanded respect. Storekeepers managed the various storage rooms. Dry goods stores, wine cellars, ice houses, and cold storage all had dedicated keepers responsible for maintaining inventories and preventing waste or theft. Kitchen porters hauled supplies, moved heavy equipment, and handled physically demanding tasks. They carried coal for cooking fires, moved large pots, delivered ingredients from storage to kitchens, and cleaned heavy equipment. Lampmen maintained the extensive lighting required in windowless kitchen areas. They filled, cleaned, and lit oil lamps throughout the kitchen complex. These support staff earned modest wages, $20 to $40 annually, but their roles were essential. Without proper supply management and support, the cooking staff couldn't function effectively. The pastry department. The pastry department operated semi-independently from the main kitchens. This separation reflected the specialized nature of pastry work and the different schedules required. The pastry chef commanded a team of pastry cooks, assistants, and specialized workers. They produced all breads, cakes, pastries, and elaborate sugarwork for the royal household. Work began early, often 3 or 4 a.m., to ensure fresh breads for breakfast. The ovens required heating, doughs needed mixing and rising, and everything had to be baked and ready by breakfast service. Elaborate desserts for evening meals were prepared throughout the day. Victorian desserts required hours of work. Layered cakes, intricate pastries, sugar sculptures, and molded confections. The pastry department worked constantly to meet demands. The department had its own ovens, work surfaces, and equipment. Pastry preparation required cooler temperatures than main cooking, necessitating separate facilities. The pastry department was typically located in a different area from the main kitchens. Pastry staff tended to stay longer in their positions compared to general kitchen staff. The specialized skills required meant experienced pastry cooks were valuable. The pastry chef often served for decades, maintaining consistency in breads and desserts. Training and advancement. Kitchen staff advanced through a rigid apprenticeship system. Young workers started in the lowest positions and worked up through demonstrated competence. A scullery maid showing aptitude might be promoted to kitchen maid after a year or two. Kitchen maids who learned quickly might assist specialized cooks, gradually taking on more responsibility. Male kitchen staff had clearer advancement paths. A young man entering as a kitchen porter or assistant cook could eventually become a specialized cook, then potentially a sous chef. French training was highly valued. Cooks who had worked in French kitchens or trained under French chefs were preferred for advancement. The royal chef was almost always French. Reading and writing skills helped advancement. Cooks who could read recipes, write reports, and maintain records had advantages over illiterate colleagues. The ultimate goal for ambitious cooks was becoming head chef at a noble household or opening their own establishment. Royal kitchen experience was the finest credential available. Discipline and standards. The kitchen hierarchy maintained order through strict discipline and exacting standards. Mistakes had consequences. The royal chef had authority to dismiss staff immediately for serious infractions. Drunkenness, theft, or gross incompetence resulted in instant dismissal without references, devastating for future employment. Lesser infractions brought reprimands, wage deductions, or temporary demotions. A cook who ruined an expensive dish might lose a week's wages. A maid who broke valuable equipment might be demoted to scullery work temporarily. Standards were absolute. Food had to be perfect. Proper temperature, correct seasoning, attractive presentation. The pressure to maintain perfection was constant and intense. The hierarchy itself maintained discipline. Each level supervised the one below, ensuring consistent standards throughout. Junior staff knew senior staff watched constantly. Physical exhaustion was expected. Staff worked until the work was done, regardless of hours. During major events, kitchen staff might work 20-hour days for extended periods. Living conditions. Kitchen staff lived in the royal residences where they worked. Living conditions varied dramatically by position in the hierarchy. Senior staff, the royal chef, sous chefs, and department heads had individual rooms, relatively comfortable by servant standards. These rooms were small but private, a significant privilege. Specialized cooks typically shared rooms with 1 or 2 others. The accommodations were basic but adequate. Kitchen maids and lower staff slept in dormitory-style rooms, often sharing beds. Privacy was non-existent. The rooms were cold in winter, hot in summer, and always crowded. All staff ate in servants' dining areas, with meals provided as part of compensation. The food was good by working-class standards, but far simpler than what they prepared for the royal family. Days off were rare. Junior staff might get 1 afternoon off per month. Senior staff had slightly more freedom, but were essentially on call constantly. The living situation created a self-contained community. Kitchen staff socialized primarily with other servants, forming relationships within the strict hierarchy. The scale of operations. The sheer scale of royal kitchen operations is difficult to comprehend by modern standards. Over 100 people worked in and around the kitchens at major royal residences. Windsor Castle's kitchen complex employed the most, but Buckingham Palace, Balmoral, and other residences all had substantial kitchen staffs. Daily food preparation required processing enormous quantities. A single day might involve butchering multiple animals, preparing hundreds of pounds of vegetables, and baking dozens of loaves of bread. The facilities themselves were massive. The kitchen complex at Windsor Castle occupied thousands of square feet across multiple rooms and levels. Separate areas for roasting, baking, pastry, fish, vegetables, washing, and storage spread across the palace basement. Equipment represented capital investment equivalent to a small factory. Multiple cooking ranges, roasting spits, specialized ovens, countless pots and pans, and elaborate serving pieces. The coordination required to operate this system was extraordinary. Timing had to be precise across multiple departments. Communication flowed through the hierarchy, with senior staff coordinating to ensure everything arrived at the correct moment. Closing, the Victorian royal kitchens operated like military organizations, with rigid hierarchies, specialized roles, and exacting standards. Over 100 people worked in coordinated precision to feed one woman and her household. The system seems absurd by modern standards, but it reflected Victorian society. Which kitchen position would you least want to have? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look behind the scenes of royal kitchens, subscribe for more stories about how Victorian households really functioned. Thanks for watching. Stirring your tea wrong could ruin your social standing. Victorian tea time was a minefield of rules where every tiny movement was judged. The way you held your cup, where you placed your spoon, whether you added milk first or last, all revealed your social class and breeding. One wrong move marked you as uncultured or ignorant. These rules existed in the collective understanding of Victorian society, passed down through families and enforced through social consequences. Breaking them meant exclusion, gossip, and damaged reputation. The elaborate etiquette served one purpose: separating those who knew the rules from those who didn't. Before we go ahead, subscribe to our channel to support us. Thanks. Let's explore the 20 bizarre rules that governed Victorian tea time. Always stir back and forth. Proper stirring moved the spoon back and forth in a straight line, from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Never in circles. Circular stirring was considered common, marking someone without proper training. The back and forth motion supposedly mixed sugar and milk without creating noise or splashing. The movement should be gentle. Vigorous stirring suggested desperation for sweetness or inability to control oneself. This rule made no practical sense. Circular stirring mixes just as effectively as back and forth motion. The rule existed purely to identify those who knew proper behavior from those who didn't. It was gatekeeping disguised as etiquette. Mothers taught daughters the correct stirring motion from childhood. Young women practiced tea service repeatedly until the back and forth motion became automatic. Getting it wrong at a social occasion was mortifying and marked you as improperly raised. Continental Europeans and Americans found this rule baffling. They stirred in circles without scandal in their own countries. British insistence on this specific motion seemed arbitrary to outsiders, which was exactly the point. The rule separated insiders from outsiders. Never raise the saucer seated. While seated, lift the cup alone, leaving the saucer on the table. Raising both marked you as common, showing distrust of your own coordination. While standing at garden parties, raising the saucer was acceptable. The rule demanded practice and created genuine difficulty for those with tremors or arthritis. Never blow on hot tea. Hot tea should be waited out, never cooled by blowing. Blowing suggested inability to wait and lack of self-control. Proper people endured burned fingers and several minutes of waiting rather than commit this crude error. The Victorian emphasis on patience and discipline trumped physical comfort. Sugar tongs required. Touching sugar with fingers was forbidden. Sugar tongs or sugar spoons were mandatory for serving sugar lumps. The rule supposedly maintained hygiene. Fingers touching communal sugar seemed unsanitary to Victorians. The tongs were specialized implements designed specifically for sugar service. They required practice to use effectively. Gripping too hard crushed the sugar lump, too light and it dropped into the tea with a splash. Proper use demonstrated refinement and practice. The requirement for proper implements reinforced class distinctions. Sugar tongs were expensive silver pieces that not every household could afford. Households lacking proper sugar service equipment marked themselves as lower class through inability to serve tea correctly. The hostess used the sugar tongs to serve each guest according to their stated preference. Guests never handled the communal sugar themselves in formal settings. In less formal settings, guests could use the tongs but never fingers. That remained forbidden, regardless of formality level. This emphasis on specialized implements for every function characterized Victorian dining generally. Every food type had its specific utensil. Proper people owned and used correct implements for everything. The proliferation of specialized utensils became markers of wealth and status. Never clink the spoon. The sound of a spoon hitting porcelain marked you as crude. After stirring, the spoon should be lifted without touching the cup sides. This quiet service required expensive, high-quality china. Cheap china chipped and made noise easily. The rule reinforced class distinctions through the tableware itself. Spoon behind the cup. After stirring, the spoon had one correct location, behind the cup on the saucer, handle pointing right. Leaving the spoon in the cup signaled you were finished. Placing it beside the cup showed ignorance. The specific placement was actually practical. Spoons left in cups splashed when lifted. Milk order reveals class. Upper classes added milk after pouring tea. Working classes added milk first. The reasoning was practical originally. Fine china withstood boiling tea without cracking. Cheap china needed milk first to prevent thermal shock from the heat. This practical difference became a rigid social marker. The phrase miffy, or IMF, milk in first, was used to describe working-class tea drinkers. The term carried condescension, marking someone as common through their milk-adding habits. Upper classes deliberately added milk last to demonstrate their china could handle it. The behavior itself signaled class regardless of the actual china quality. Even when visiting others' homes with unknown china quality, upper-class people added milk last as ingrained habit. The debate persists today. British people still judge milk addition order, though the original practical reasons disappeared long ago. Tea experts argue milk first actually produces better-tasting tea by preventing milk proteins from denaturing, but etiquette never cared about taste, only about class distinction. Never stack plates. Used plates should sit side by side, never stacked. Stacking was servants' work, inappropriate for guests. The rule reinforced class awareness. Guests engaging in servant-like behavior confused social roles. This created practical problems during crowded tea parties, but attempting to organize plates violated etiquette. If you're still here after 8 tea rules, subscribe for the remaining 12 absurdities. Scones split by hand. Scones should be broken apart with fingers, never cut with a knife. Using a knife marked you as unfamiliar with proper service and showed you didn't understand scone structure. The proper technique involved gently pulling the scone apart along its natural separation line. Well-baked scones have a weakness through the middle where the halves naturally separate. Pulling with fingers revealed this line and split the scone cleanly. This rule actually had practical basis. Scones are crumbly and don't cut cleanly with knives. Cutting creates more crumbs and destroys texture. Hand-breaking genuinely produces better results and preserves the scone's interior structure. Each half received its own treatment. Jam and cream spread on each half separately. The scone halves should never be sandwiched back together after dressing. Reforming the scone created too large a bite and appeared crude, like eating a burger rather than delicate tea-time food. The rule was one of the few with sound reasoning beyond pure social gatekeeping. Yet it still served as a test. Only people who regularly ate scones knew the proper hand-breaking method. Using a knife immediately identified someone unfamiliar with refined tea service. Pinch the handle. The proper grip pinched the cup handle between thumb and index finger, middle finger supporting from below. Ring and pinky. Fingers should curve naturally without extension. The extended pinky, sticking out while holding the cup, was considered affected and pretentious, an error as serious as using wrong implements. The pinching grip required practice to master. The cup had to remain stable and level without visible effort or tension. Proper people made correct cup holding look effortless through years of practice since childhood. This specific hand position became visual shorthand for refinement and elegance. Paintings and photographs of elegant society always showed this correct grip. The visual vocabulary of proper tea drinking included this exact hand position as essential element. The grip had some practical basis. Pinching provided good control while maintaining appearance of delicacy. Looping fingers through the handle appeared clumsy and suggested lack of finesse or inability to handle delicate objects properly. Children practiced correct cup holding repeatedly until it became automatic. Young people at their first formal tea parties concentrated intensely on maintaining proper grip throughout the occasion, terrified of reverting to incorrect positions. Victorian tea party photographs reveal how thoroughly this rule was followed. Every participant holds cups identically, the proper pinching grip with naturally curved fingers. The uniformity demonstrates the rule's complete acceptance across social classes, a tempting refinement. Never refill your own cup first. The hostess controlled tea service, pouring for others before herself. Guests never self-served except informally. Self-service suggested the hostess was failing in her duties or that proper order had broken down. The hostess's role was critical to the entire gathering. She set the tone, ensured everyone had refreshments, and managed the social dynamics. Controlling tea service was central to demonstrating hospitality and social competence. The refill order followed social hierarchy. Important guests received offers first, working down through social rank. This reinforced the hostess's authority as orchestrator of social occasions and ensured everyone understood their position. This created pressure on hostesses to monitor all guests' cups constantly, offering refills at appropriate times without being asked. A guest finishing their tea without a refill often reflected badly on the hostess's attention and hospitality skills. Men never poured tea in mixed company. Tea service was feminine domain. A man pouring tea suggested no proper woman was present. If the hostess stepped away temporarily, the eldest or highest-ranking woman present assumed pouring duties, maintaining the gender-specific nature of tea service. Jam and cream order. In Devon, cream went first, then jam. Everywhere else in England, particularly Cornwall, jam first, then cream. This fierce regional variation created social confusion and remains contentious today. The Devon method supposedly originated at Tavistock Abbey in the 11th century. After Vikings raided the abbey, the Earl of Devon rewarded reconstruction workers with bread, clotted cream, and strawberry jam. Cream spread like butter, jam on top. This became the first recorded cream tea. Cornwall disputes Devon's claim to correctness. The Cornish argue jam should go first because it soaks into the warm scone, preventing the cream from melting on contact with heat. The cream then sits on top as the crowning glory, their county's finest product displayed prominently rather than hidden under jam. The debate became symbolic of regional identity. Queen Elizabeth II preferred the Cornish method, jam first, which should have settled matters. Devonians refused to concede, insisting cream spread like butter is the only logical method. The order makes no practical difference to taste. Both methods work fine. The passion behind the debate reveals how arbitrary etiquette rules became markers of local pride and identity, transcending class to create regional divisions instead. Never slurp. Tea should be consumed in complete silence. Any audible sipping was unforgivable. Silent sipping required technique, small amounts cooling against the palate before swallowing. Hot tea made this difficult. The emphasis on silence extended to all eating and drinking at Victorian tables. Napkin placement signals. Napkin left on the chair meant you would return. Napkin on the table meant you had finished. This signal system allowed temporary departures without explanations. Servants read these signals to know when to clear places. Forgetting the signal system created confusion about intentions. No dunking biscuits. Dipping biscuits in tea was crude and childish in polite company. The temptation was strong. Dunked biscuits taste better when softened in tea, but proper people resisted this urge in any formal setting. The rule reflected Victorian values of self-control over immediate gratification. Dunking suggested inability to enjoy food in proper forms, requiring modification for enjoyment. Proper people could control their desires and eat biscuits dry if that was correct behavior. Children received repeated correction for dunking. Parents treated it as serious breach requiring immediate intervention. The lesson was about controlling desires and following social rules even when they decreased enjoyment. In private or very informal family settings, some relaxation occurred. Family teas without guests might allow dunking, but any formal tea service absolutely prohibited it, regardless of how close the relationship between hostess and guests. The rule had some practical elements. Dunked biscuits sometimes broke, dropping pieces into the tea. This created mess and wasted both biscuit and tea. But the real reason was social. Proper people didn't dunk. Working-class tea culture accepted dunking more readily. The prohibition served as another class marker, separating refined behavior from common behavior. Where and when you could dunk revealed your social position and the formality expectations of your social circle. Servants serve from right. Plates and food arrived from the right side, cleared dishes left from the left. This directional rule prevented collisions and maintained service flow. Servants received specific training in service direction. The rule applied primarily in homes with servants, marking it as another class distinction. Never point with utensils. Cutlery should never be used for gesturing or pointing. Utensils remained stationary except during actual use. The rule combined safety concerns. Waving knives created danger, with social prohibition against pointing generally. Animated talkers found this restrictive, but had to resist the temptation. Spoon-in-cup signals finished. Leaving the spoon in the cup meant you wanted no more tea. The hostess read this signal and offered no refills. This silent communication system was practical, allowing guests to decline without verbal refusal. But it required everyone knowing the code. Unfamiliarity caused confusion. Never talk with food in mouth. Any food in the mouth required complete silence until swallowing. Even a single crumb meant waiting before speaking. This created awkward pauses. If asked a question while chewing, you had to finish first. Small bites helped manage this rule by reducing silence periods. Second helpings must be offered. Guests never requested additional food. The hostess offered. Guests accepted or refused. Asking marked you as greedy. Proper hostesses monitored guests' consumption, offering more at appropriate times. Guests wanting more had to wait hopefully for offers that might never come rather than ask. Why so many rules? These 20 rules served as gatekeeping mechanisms. Most had no practical purpose beyond identifying insiders from outsiders. The rules were taught from childhood through repeated correction. By adulthood, proper behavior should be automatic. Getting rules wrong at social occasions damaged reputation and limited opportunities. Class divisions ran through every rule. Upper classes could afford proper tableware, knew the signals, had been trained since youth. Lower classes revealed themselves through rule violations, wrong milk order, circular stirring, raised saucers while seated. The psychological pressure was intense. Guests monitored their own behavior constantly. Hostesses watched guests while appearing not to watch. Everyone performed under mutual surveillance, knowing one mistake could have social consequences. So, which rule seems most ridiculous? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this exploration of Victorian social absurdity, subscribe for more stories about how people really lived in the past. Thanks for watching.